Hey guys, thanks for joining. We're picking up where we left off last week with Nicola Davis. I had just confessed my secret wish list of going to a holiday market in Europe with my sister Kate. I had this little secret wish list of things to do with Kate one day. And it's funny, it'll be interesting to see how we map it all out, because I had all of this freedom in my 20s and 30s, and Kate had very limited freedom just because she was raising all these kids and being a wife. And now I'm she's going to be on the cusp. Her kids will graduate and leave the nest, and I'll probably still have littles. So I don't know when we'll do it, but my goal, one of them, is to go to a holiday market with her in Europe.
Well, all the talk about community, something that South Africans would totally do and be like, oh, I know somebody right there. I will give you give them my brother-in-law's number, and they will literally probably help you and let you stay there and all of that. So when you do decide to do it,
no,
and that's not a favor, that's just what you do. Oh, I live in a cool place. You should totally come and use me while you're here and stay here and let me help you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And I can't wait to meet your brother-in-law. Knock, knock. Here I am.
They'll do it.
It is on my list, though. Kate is currently dealing with trvel anxiety since it was after you had your second.
Yeah, after I had Arlo, I developed really bad postpartum anxiety. I'd never dealt with anxiety ever in my life.
Literally not anxious. I'm the most anxious child, and Kate was like, "What is it? What is being anxious?"
Yeah,
holding feral animals next to her face. I'm not nervous at all.
Yeah. I remember Jen asking me in college once what stressed me out, because I was such a chill person. I was like, I don't know that I've ever felt stressed, really. Maybe a little nervous about a test, but otherwise pretty chill.
So it all hit you.
So it all hit me, and it was so bad. It was I was nervous to ride in a car, and even still, I drive. I don't like to ride passenger at all. It's if I'm not physically in control as much as possible, I try to avoid it. And so flying has been my true fucking nightmare lately. And I just keep hoping it's going to go away. Arlo's 5 at this point. It's when is this going to stop? Is it ever going to stop? Is it just part of me now? How unfortunate.
I'm sorry. It just takes up a lot of time. I one of the 100% of people who take anxiety medication now. I remember when I started taking the medication, I'm I have so much time now. I was worrying all the time. Now I have time to think about stuff and do other stuff. It takes up time.
It's very, mentally taxing. But even when Kate came to New York,
I hope you do.
I was like, oh my gosh, let's go do all these things. And she had brought her littlest, Simon. I don't know. Simon was probably less than a year old at that point, right?
Yeah. And I only brought him because I was nursing, and I don't produce enough to pump. So he just had to come with me everywhere. But yeah, we have pictures. He's really little. He's
but she came, and I was so excited. I was living in New York, and I was like, I can't believe you're here, and we're going to go do all these things. And we got on the subway, and I was like, okay, this isn't plain. It'll be fine. We got on the subway, and Kate was like, oh my God, we got to get off. She got so panicky. And I was like, it's such a weird dynamic to see as a sibling, that shift in her, because I'm used to being the one that has to be talked off the ledge about everything, every little thing. Does my chicken look cooked enough? I'm sure I'm going to get sick of it. Every little thing. And Kate would always just be like, whatever,
she'd eat it,
lick her shoe. She didn't care, so it was such a weird thing to see her go through that.
Well, they say it takes up to 5 years for your hormones to rebalance. So you still got a couple of years.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and then then I got pregnant with Simon, unexpectedly. We didn't think we were going to have another kid. And then here he is. And I was really worried that the anxiety was going to get worse. And thinking back on it now, it didn't necessarily get worse, but I started having severely graphic, intrusive thoughts with Simon. And that wasn't something I dealt with Arlo. That's a new thing for me that I get to work through. So specifically with Simon, on that subway or walking down the street, or even when my husband and I would go to the park, if I had Simon like in a stroller, I was certain that somebody was going to like grab him and like throw him into the ground. And like it was playing in my head. It was like I was seeing all of that and I was feeling what it would feel like if that happened. It was like, oof. And even now, like my husband and I try to go to movies sometimes. We went to a movie last night because my mom's visiting, and I'll catch myself like just staring at the door, like waiting for somebody to come in. And like if somebody would come in and like do something bad, then like
what would I do?
What would I do? I know what my husband would do, but then what if my husband would like get shot? And it's like it's literally playing like a cruel movie in my head versus the movie that I'm actually here to see and enjoy. And then I don't even know what the movie is about that we're watching because I'm so busy with my own thing. So I just like want it to go away. But I tried to get on
medication and things.
I tried to get on.
It helps. I say that because it helps. And I've been there with the same things.
Well, and I tried to get on medication for a while. And because I was a stay-at-home mom, I was really nervous about side effects. And like, I thought I was on a medication that was good. And then I started getting these like kind of dizzy spells, like in the middle of the day. It was always right around the same time. And I was like, dude, if I pass out, like these kids are going to be here alone. And my husband is 45 minutes away and he wouldn't even know that I passed out, you know? So then what? And so then I stopped taking the medication and now I'm like, okay, I feel like I can't even get like a headache without worrying that like something is wrong. But then like, if I take Tylenol, what if I get like a bad reaction to a medicine that I've taken my whole life? You know what I mean? It's like, I just can't.
And when you're in the like a logical phase of it, you're like, I know this is stupid. But then like when you're in it,
then you're like
you like are not able to think like that.
So instead I just sit around and worry a lot and I try to like take a nap if I'm feeling really anxious, but then you lay down and that's not happening either. So, you know.
The funny thing about the napping is I used to use sleeping. Well, I still do sometimes. If I'm like overwhelmed, it's like a shutdown. I'm like, okay, I can't stop my brain from overthinking. But if I go nap, it's like I get like a little reprieve. And one thing I can do in life is fall asleep really fast and really hard. And Kate can't. Like that is not her gift. And so and it's funny, I do remember seasons where I was more stressed and people in my life, including Kate, would call it like, you sleep a lot. And I'd be like, I don't know. I mean, it makes me, it's a total coping mechanism. Like, it's like, oh my God, I get to like, or I just feel like my brain has worked so hard all day worrying about all these things.
It's exhausting.
So then I would be like more tired. Which is like on the other side of that. I, for decades, thought there was no other side, but I now just don't have as much anxiety. And I'm in a pretty anxious season of life with a lot of, I looked up like a list of like the 10 things that are most anxiety inducing for like a relationship. And I was like, Saichin and I have had like 5 of these in the past 6 months. Like, but I'm not like super anxious. So there is like, a light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. But,
I'm still looking to find it. You know,
I know
I'll
Kate's like, please, a glimmer. But speaking of intrusive thoughts, I guess, like going back to culturally, I think there are just countries and ecosystems that are just better at managing stress or have a life philosophy that doesn't include kind of that American grind and anxiety that we fuel through media and everything here. Would you say that was an adjustment for you, I guess?
Definitely. So first of all, I think in South Africa, you have about 20 public holidays a year. So if you are clever with your leave and your public holidays, you can get a full 2-week vacation in both April, and everyone takes it. Nothing happens in South Africa in April. And in December, another 2 to 4 week holiday. Nothing's happening. So first of all, we take vacations, and 2 week is standard. 10 days is standard. 2 weeks is good. And over December, you can take a month. Like, rest and recuperation is definitely built into our society. And on weekends as well, like if I think about social gatherings and stuff, we don't I feel like I do a lot more things here. Like I'm always doing things like going on a hike or like even relaxation is work sometimes. Whereas we just like sit and light the grill and hang out with our friends and then have these vacations. Yeah. Like I've said to a lot of people, like the American dream is very real. If you work your butt off, you can achieve your American dream with all the privileges that I have to help me. But yeah, you work for it. It's not free.
Yeah.
It doesn't just come.
Like at what cost? And I think that that's like the thing that our generation, the generation below us, like is really starting to like rewrite. Like, is this the American dream? Does it feel like a dream? Like, I don't know. Like, is it worth? Is it worth it?
Really
and I think that, you know, for a long time there was the incentive, not even as much from my parents, but like my grandparents, that, okay, well, you'll get to retire though. You'll get to retire and you'll have this, you know,
you'll get to have a
social
house,
security, and you get to do all these things. And like, that feels further and further like a reality for us. So we're like, this doesn't feel very dreamy anymore. Like, this feels
like, what am I actually going to get? But isn't it kind of liberating in a way? Like I think I can say this from the perspective that I've just like moved country with nothing. I've been laid off. My husband's been laid off. Like, it's kind of all of that when it breaks that system and the system of steps that you thought you had to take. It's really fucking liberating. Like, oh, you go through it for a while and you're like, oh, we're actually fine. Like, one of us hasn't had a job for however long, but we're actually, it's funny how little you can live on. You don't need all this money.
Well, it's not doom and gloom or like fire and brimstone. And Kate and I have talked a lot about that. Like, even with our parents who are not like Debbie Downer people, but like, I think there has been this fear that they instilled in us out of protection. But like neither one of us, like, I don't think knew how to like compartmentalize it appropriately. Where it was just like, okay, like, you got to prepare for the worst. Like, you have to make sure you have your ducks in a row. You have to, and it's like, listen, it's always good to have a plan, but yeah, I mean, when like the shit hits the fan, like, it's going to be okay.
Just got to, I think there's also a difference of like, it was fire and brimstone, like you say, but it was also so remote and it probably wasn't going to happen to you. Like, if it happened to you, it would be so bad. But I feel like there's such a, we're probably all going to get retrenched at some, like, it's such a part of work culture and society. People get late retrenched means.
Oh, I was like, ooh, new word.
Like, like, it happens all the time for no freaking good reason sometimes. So it's like, it's an eventuality. Is there really any point panicking about something that's probably going to happen? You see people dealing with it all the time. Like, our reality is just different to their reality. Like, I don't think we have mental and emotional capacity to worry about this stuff when, oh my God, it's like could happen at any given moment. Like, I know I don't. Like, that's been one of my realizations. This concept of the definition of being safe. Like, South Africa is not necessarily a safe country. You could get carjacked, you could get murdered in your, like, it's not, you know, like how they talk about Brazil, certain places in Brazil as well. It's not a safe place to be physically. Like, a lot of women, like, the rape cases are just astronomical. It's like physical safety is not easy, but then here it's like my economic safety is not necessarily guaranteed. Like, could get laid off at any point. If I have a huge accident and I'm not able to work, that's detrimental to a household's life. Like, you can be in debt for the rest of your life from an accident, or like what you're one step away from something like horrible going wrong. But we'll probably be fine. And then if it does happen, we'll also still be fine. Like, people are living with that debt, like actually living their lives, and those things have happened. And we've like found a way to live with that. So I don't know, my concept of safe, that's been an interesting realization of what does safe mean and but I can walk around at night. I can go on a bike ride and not worry about somebody mugging me. Just the definition of safety is interesting.
When I went to Brazil, for work. When was it? I think it was maybe 2 years ago. And I have a dear friend that I met in Nashville. She studied for a summer in Nashville, and she lives in Rio. And I was in Brazil for work, and I was like, I'm going to take just a few days and go see her before I head back to the States. And the entire time I was in Brazil, people kept saying, like, you need to be more careful. You need to be more careful. We had a video shoot there, and there were security guards outside, which the only time we've ever had security at a shoot has been when there's like Taylor Swift there, and she has her own security. You know what I mean? But like, I had never been to a shoot where like the production needed security. And I remember I walked out and I was just like walking, and the security guard stopped me and wanted to know where I was going. And I was like, oh, I'm just the bodega right there. Like, I'm going to just go get a drink. And he was like, you can't go by yourself. And I was so confused by that, because I've done international travel. And I've traveled a bunch in the States, but I've always traveled, I guess, to countries that were relatively safe. And this was like one of the trips that I literally didn't do any research for. And then I just got there and I was like, oh crap. And I remember my friend and her, I met her mom and we stayed with her aunt, and they were appalled that I didn't have like a lock on my suitcase. They're like, you can't like trust the airport security with your suit. And I'm like, okay. And like
they stole Dylan's flip-flops.
Literally. I'm like, what do you want out of my suitcase?
Got his flip-flops stolen 3 times in Rio. I don't know how.
Also, they're everywhere, like pretty easy to get. But yeah, it was really, and everything I did that I even would do in New York, like set my bag down and run in really quick to pay for my coffee. They were like, you don't do that here.
Do not leave.
And I think that's like such, such a crazy adjustment. And trying to even explain to my family now when I go to countries like that, like they are assuming worst case scenario and I'm assuming nothing's going to happen. So like there is like a happy medium somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. And that worst case scenario that they're imagining is not what's going to happen to you. Like your bag might get stolen. Like that's the stuff that it's so part of every day. It's weird. That level of fear, like of your bag getting stolen or something like that. COVID kind of felt like that to me. Like when I moved here, that fear lifted of like something bad happening to you, like driving at night, all of that. Like we couldn't really do that. There's always this like fear. And it went away when I moved here. But then COVID was the same thing, like that feeling of like fear constantly. Like, am I going to catch this? Is somebody going to give this to me? Or like, was that dirty? It's definitely a different way to live your life. But then you look at the people in Brazil and like, you look at Brazil and you're like, damn, it is pretty amazing there.
Yeah. They had like these little monkeys that were just like in their parks, like squirrels. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cute. Like
the monkeys will steal your food.
They are like ready to steal. They're like, this is our culture. We're going to steal your stuff. Give me your flip-flops.
There's also some weird with like petty crimes like that. There's a weird sense of it not really being a crime. It's just like a state of play. Like, oh, you have something that is not precious enough for you to look after properly, then you can clearly afford to buy another one. I don't have that thing. I need it. You've left it there. Like, take it. Like you didn't look after your shit properly. It's kind of your problem.
That is an interesting concept. They wouldn't even let me have my cell phone out when I was there, like walking around.
Oh yeah.
Because they were like, people will take off on like a motorcycle and just grab it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Lesson learned. So you can come here and that won't happen, but you don't get to go to the movie without being afraid someone's going to do a mass shooting. So give and take.
Exactly. It's the concept of safety, or like sending your kids to school. Yeah. The concept of safety has been an interesting thing to think about lately.
Yeah. What does DC do to, I guess, maybe compound that? Because when I think about places, not to be a Debbie Downer, but when Saichen and I talk about places we want to live, forever and ever I wanted to live in New York, and I was so scared because I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. And so I was like, okay, well, like New York isn't safe because if people want to hurt us, like that's where they're going to attack. And I'm like, DC isn't safe because if people want to like make a statement, that's where they're going to attack. But it's also like in a lot of ways, probably one of the safest places because there's so many resources there.
Well, my next door neighbor works at the Pentagon. She's like a chief of staff of one of the big
casual
sections of the Pentagon. Yeah, exactly. Happens a lot in DC. Some people can't tell us about their jobs. If they do that, they're pretty fishy, but some people can't. She's like, don't worry, we'll let you know. They will know, and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't feel less, well, we're kind of out of the city now, but we lived in DC for 8 years. It didn't feel less, it felt more safe than South Africa. And DC's got some interesting neighborhoods too. But it feels more obvious. Like, it's not like something that's going to happen to you at any given moment. It's like, you can kind of see if you're in a sketchy neighborhood and you need to be careful, or you can, I don't know, still felt safer. I don't feel anxiety about like bombs hitting me or like that kind of stuff. I mean, hopefully it'll be quick. The only thing that sucks is that my family will suffer because they don't get hit by the same bomb. I don't know. It's better than the idea of getting like raped.
Yeah.
Something. I know this is a Debbie Downer.
No, but those are like, I think that is a good perspective to have though, of like being in a country that has violent crime that is super common, and especially violent crime against women that probably in a lot of areas isn't prosecuted, isn't super cared about. That's yeah. I mean, that's like my worst. Yeah. If someone wants to attack me, hit me over the head, pistol whip me, listen, not great, not a great day. Didn't want it to happen, but way better than like a sexual assault, which I grew up watching Law and Order SVU. And listen, that show has done some great work bringing awareness, but you want to talk about instilling some fears. I was always like, oh God, somebody's going to get me.
And South Africa has got such it's so complicated. It's sexual crime. It's a lot about power. I mean, they say that rape is about power and power dynamics. And I think here, if that's the case, it's like between men and women, like exercising your power. In South Africa, it's like a whole other level of complication between have and have nots and race and all of that. It's just like, and like entitlement. It's a hell of a complicated mess, honestly. If you want to get into that.
Well, I guess I am curious, like I don't know that all Americans would agree. Well, I don't think all Americans agree on anything, but that would agree with this statement. But I think that like from my perspective, it's very obvious we've taken a lot of steps back in terms of the progress we've made with racial dynamics in the US. And I'm curious, I guess, like, what was that like when you left? What kind of shifts have you seen? Because it does feel like globally we're regressing in a couple of crucial areas.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions on this. It's funny. As a South African, I mean, I've mentioned a few times, I came from what here is middle class, but what in South Africa is immense privilege. I didn't even know, like my definition of racism was like discrimination, like actively discriminating against people. Like the concept of societal racism or like institutional racism, I did not comprehend it. And I was only able to comprehend it when I came here and looked at South Africa from a distance. And I did happen to come right after the Ahmaud Arbery murder and the Black Lives Matter movement really started gaining traction in DC. So I came right in the middle of a very pivotal time for America. I was as accidentally racist as anybody else, but I didn't think so. Like white South Africans don't think they're racist. They think they're paying their housekeeper that they get to have every day a little bit more money than the next person, so they're good people. Meantime, that person has to go live without running water.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have enough, they have to wake up. But that's not racist. Like you can't see it. And I didn't see it. So all that to say, I don't know if we've regressed. I think that we are seeing the extent of the racism here. I think it was always there and we'd maybe tackled a few layers of it, but now a few more layers have been exposed that we kind of have to figure out what to do with. And a lot of the realization for me came from South Africa, because just things like how poverty looks so different there and here. And just this concept of how I was willing to let somebody live because of what I was paying them, and then how they had to live. And it only hit that, it's like, it's embarrassing. It only hit me about 5 years ago because I was in contact with my housekeeper. And we couldn't make a time to speak to each other because when she had battery, she was at work. And her battery would die because she doesn't have electricity in her house. You know, like people are not getting paid a living wage to live somewhere. And it's not even a house. It's like a shack. So I I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this, but anyway, I wasn't able to see that from far away. And I think in America, we're often, I think, in the same position. It's really hard to entangle something that you've grown up with inherently to accept, you know, both sides accept as normal. What is a good person? What is a racist person? So yeah, I think we're just discovering, and it's hard to learn this about yourself, that we all have a little bit more of it than we thought we did. Not that we're bad people or violent or discriminatory people. It's just like bred into the fabric of life. And it's starting to get exposed.
Yeah.
We're having to come to terms with it. Yeah.
Kate, do you want to, I feel like this, I mean, it's relevant for everybody, but specifically Nicola, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about, some of the ways that like I internally struggle, but can compartmentalize based on, you know, how I'm feeling that day, or almost like justify my actions, because maybe we're not in like the easiest season of life or whatever, as if they're apples to apples. They're so different. But I know this has been an ongoing thing for you. One, like you're so empathetic to the plight of like homeless people and people asking for money. And I've always known that to be true about you, but also like, I feel like when you became a mom, that became a much more difficult thing for you to navigate, because you have these like this young kid asking this, like, why wouldn't we help that person? And so I think that like that layer of having to mother and parent and explain is like something that I haven't had to encounter yet, but I imagine will be really hard for me around those topics that I probably have some work to do on, because it is one thing to compartmentalize it to yourself, but very different to explain it to a child, like why you're doing something or not doing something.
I'm so interested in your answer, Kate, because poor Sienna doesn't even say anything. She'll like look at them and be interested in them, but she like won't say anything. And I'm like, shit, that's what I've instilled at this point. Like that somebody can be clearly wanting and
we just ignore.
We can walk past.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm trying to remember like when it really hit me. Cause I mean, our parents, when we grew up, my parents were always very like, you don't know people's struggle, you shouldn't assume. But then sometimes would also say things about like, you know, drug addicts, and like a lot of homeless people have like problems with that. And I feel like it wasn't until I got a little older, and then like I dealt with a friend that had some drug addiction problems. And it's just like, I just look at people now and I think like, there's not even like a system in place to help them. Like, we don't know why people, I mean, a lot of people get addicted because they've gotten in accidents and get pain medication at the hospital, and then they just get addicted to these things. And so like, I've always, because I really have only dealt with it with Oliver, who is 10. And, you know, Arlo is 5 and doesn't really ask those questions either. But Oliver, from a pretty young age, would notice and want to like give money if somebody was asking for money, or give help if somebody was asking for it.
Give their personal money.
Yeah, would like pull money out of. Yes, yeah.
Such like an empathetic heart, like
and we've had to have conversations about like, you know, we want to help people as much as we can, but we can't, like, nothing that we can give them is going to really like set them up. You know what I mean? Like, so we can give them money to go buy lunch, but like outside of that, like we need to try to be thinking about what we can do for people long term, because, you know, I don't want Oliver to look at anybody and think that they're on the street and they did something naughty to get there. Like, I don't even, like, I don't even look at.
It goes back to that. Like, we're one, like a couple of steps away from that. You hear the stories of these people. It happens easily to a normal person.
So like, we have a
bad divorce and accidents.
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations about that. I mean, and even now, like where we live, in Spokane, Washington, there's a pretty bad homeless problem downtown. And I just try to always talk to Ollie about like, you know, we live out here and if worst come to worst and we lost all of our money, we have family that would get us back, and not everybody does. And like, people become homeless, and it can be, I don't want Ollie to think they did something naughty to get there. Like, I try really hard to talk about like just how hard stuff is and how some people don't have good coping or good support systems. Or sometimes it just is like so bad that it's like, well, what's it matter? You know what I mean? Like, nothing. I
can't process this myself.
Yeah. So Logan and I, my husband, we're pretty open about conversations in front of Ollie that have to do with like ways that we feel like our government is failing in that. You know, like what are, you know, out here, cost of living is insane. It feels insane everywhere, but out here it is super high. And you can't even get like an apartment without having like a good credit score and good credit history and a solid employment status. And like, but like you can't even you can't get a job if you can't put an address on your application, or you can't get a job if you don't have a phone number that they could contact you at. And then to have a phone number, you have to have a cell phone.
So how the hell do you get yourself out of this situation? Like, it's impossible. Chicken and egg kind of situation.
So with Ollie, we just try to answer questions in a way of like, we want to help as much as we can, but unfortunately we don't have enough money to like really support this person into an apartment or into another thing. But that's what like we should expect from our government or our local communities to care enough to try. And so like, I'm just trying to get Ollie to kind of keep an open mind on that, you know, because I don't know what Oliver will end up doing. Ollie is a super empathetic kid. And maybe one day we'll put together programs that can help, or we'll want to like volunteer to do those things. But I think, you know, the racial conversation has been a new one for us. I
tried to do it at bedtime last night, like to explain why Juneteenth was a holiday. I kind of didn't do a great job. I did a job.
When it's hard, because when you raise your kids to not have any sort of like issue, it's hard to even explain why some people have an issue. So it's like,
exactly. That's what I
don't have the words because I don't understand it either. And I'm an adult.
And she hadn't even realized that Black people and white people get treated differently at all. I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm going to tell you about that race that people think Black people
but also,
are, like,
I guess you're going to have to, because the school systems here aren't going to.
Yeah, the school systems definitely are
going to.
Yeah. And that's scary to think about. Like, you know, I don't want to get into politics because it feels like a horrible, slippery, awful, terrible slope that just makes me want to crawl in a hole and hide from everything. But yeah, like with our kids, we really can't expect, we don't know what to expect from education moving forward. And so for us,
the government
now it's like Ollie is finally getting to the age where it's like we can start introducing like different movies that kind of tackle that topic and then talk about it after. Or we had Dwayne Logan on here, and he did like this incredibly beautiful little short film, Black Thoughts. And so like sitting down and having Ollie watch those with us. Or Oliver randomly wanted to read To Kill a Mockingbird, and literally did read it, like the whole thing. And so we're like having conversations about that. But I think it's just like being really open to having it, you know, because my kids are all in that kind of born privilege of just being like white, male, like middle class. And there's this guilt that comes with it, because I'm on the mother side of it. I want my kids to be safe. I can't imagine how hard it is for people of color, very specifically in my experience, for Black women that have Black sons. I can't imagine the awful anxiety that comes with that. And
how early you have to have
them. And so for me, it's like, we've never shied away from it. As soon as Ollie started asking questions, it wasn't a thing of like, well, we'll talk about it when you're older, because like, that's not fair. These other kids don't get to wait until they're in their teens to start having racial discussions. They feel it much earlier.
I totally agree with you. And that's where that whole age appropriate thing comes in. And even that is not like, is it age appropriate to teach a 6-year-old Black kid that he could get like, you know, that stuff happens. But yeah, I struggle with like the age appropriateness because I want to teach her these things, but she can't grasp all of it. And you also don't want to create you don't want to create shame.
Right.
You want to create motivation for change. We're just not necessarily equipped. I hope, there's resources coming and stuff, but it's definitely something to navigate.
Well, I do appreciate that it feels like a lot of the shows that the kids have watched for a long time, like always have, it's not just white kids anymore. I think that we grew up with very whitewashed TV. And like one of my favorite shows growing up was Boy Meets World. And I still think Boy Meets World is incredible and great, but there's like not a lot of people of color in that show at all.
Yeah, just tokenism. Yeah. Even in the South African shows, honestly, they kept it so separate. They had like the shows for the Black kids and the shows for the white kids.
And like one of the first shows that Oliver really loved here was Bubble Guppies. And we would watch Bubble Guppies for hours, man. They had all these fun songs and everything, but they also have like a little like Black mermaid. They have an Asian looking mermaid. Like I think there are 2 white mermaids. So still like majority white, but there's like effort, right? There's effort. Progress. And so it's like my kids kind of grew up with this like more colorful view of what people are. And I feel like that has...
And what's normal, like the range of normal. Like, it's not like unusual to see a Black person. Like if you're starting from like, this is unusual in the first place, you've got a much longer road to walk.
But so then I think it's like, I don't know. We also started watching, rewatching Seventh Heaven, which is another show I grew up watching because we didn't have... We didn't have cable, so it was one of the very few shows that were even an option for us. And we didn't grow up super religious, but I liked the show because I really loved Mary Camden, who was played by Jessica Biel. And because I just she was sporty and I liked her. But I watch it now sometimes with Oliver and we almost watch it and laugh because the way that they portrayed people, I think that they thought they were doing something good, but in reality, like there's this episode where their aunt is like struggling with alcoholism and they make her seem like she is legitimately possessed. And I'll talk with Ollie about it now. And I'm like, it's funny. Like they kind of make it out like she is like, there's really something terribly, terribly wrong with her. And it's like a lot of people struggle with this and it's not,
it's not all of who you are.
Yeah, and it's not fair. Like there are people that can have drinks and are fine, but also like to kind of paint her to be this like real lunatic almost. And it's just my husband struggles with alcohol and he's been sober for a year and a half. And so I think like kind of having these examples of like this is what this actually can look like. And it's not as scary. It's serious. But like your dad is more than somebody that struggles with alcohol. Exactly. And it felt like they've really painted this character for this aunt of like, she's an alcoholic and we really need to be praying for her and we really need to be watching her. And it's like,
and I don't even think it's an old fashioned mentality. My husband's also a recovering addict of a different sort, but like one of the first things you have to realize is that this is still a person who deserves love, has wants and needs. It's just like a part of who they are. And it is a moral issue, but it's also it's not their morality. Right. It's something that they struggle with. Like it's a disease.
Yeah. So I think
it's hard enough for us to grasp it as adults.
So I think for our house, we've just really focused on like whole person rather than like skin color, how much money they make, what they struggle with, where they live. It's like whole person. What is that person giving you and how are they making you feel? And do we want to continue to try to have a relationship and understand that person? Or do we want to move away from that? But it's not because they are an addict or it's not because they don't make very much money or they make too much money. It's like because of the way they make us feel, because of what they're doing. so that we're not categorizing like, oh, everyone that struggles with this thing are going to be like this person. It's like, no, that person just sucks, you know?
It's so funny. I thought you were talking about race again for a second. And it's so funny how the two conversations can go so differently. It's like, okay, cool. If you're talking about addiction, all of that makes total sense. Talking about race, all of that makes total sense. Like, people are people. But yet we still have this, and I know I'm flip-flopping from a very important point. And thank you for sharing that about your husband. It's nice to know that other people are going through the same thing. It's not a lot of conversations where you get to talk openly about that. But going back to your racial conversations, there's also this responsibility that I haven't figured out how to navigate to address that, like, but people did and do treat Black people differently. And we do have like a bit of a responsibility to communicate that somehow, which is hard when the kid hasn't learned that bias yet. Like, I don't want to introduce bias by like telling them about it if it hasn't occurred to them. Like, I don't know what to do about that exactly.
Yeah, it's hard, but I think just like for us in our house, like, we just try to make it a safe enough space that like we can all ask questions and have these like conversations. And like at the end of all of it, I just don't ever want my kids to feel like stupid for asking something, or embarrassed that they didn't know the answer, or that they maybe thought something that wasn't right. Which I think is like a deep-seated thing for me, like sometimes feeling very stupid or feeling like I shouldn't have asked something the way that I asked it. But yeah, motherhood,
awesome. Good
motherhood
for
and
you.
Parenting is really hard. So,
and I want to add one more thing to that list, like the shame. I mean, if you've gone through addiction in your family as well, you know how big of a deal shame is and how that comes into everything. So my husband and I talk a lot about shame and like how important it is to him that our kids don't feel shame because of how unproductive it is. So how do we change these, when these conversations do come up, change them to productive, like conversations of like how we can help within our means, instead of like getting stuck in shame, which just doesn't help anyone, including yourself.
Yeah. And I think shame also drives, like, for people who don't want to admit they have the bias or don't want to acknowledge change that needs to happen. I think a lot of it comes from feeling ashamed. And so it's like, if we as the people who really want this change, can have conversations with people who are maybe struggling with certain areas of change and talk about it in a way that's not shameful, where it's like, were your family, they were colonizers. Do you have feelings about that? Yeah, you do. Do you need to walk around every day and feel this like stain upon your life because you came from that? No. But like, should you be aware that you had a privilege and that there are other people that don't have that privilege? Yeah. Like, I think there's like an appreciation for, even if it comes from like a really sad place that like other people are struggling, it's like, okay, I am so grateful that I get to live a life where I can enact change and I'm not living within this ecosystem. And I want to show that gratitude by making change, because it isn't fair that anyone should have to live this way.
And I feel glad to not be like in the dark and like you were saying, Kate, like to feel stupid about it. Like, I didn't realize that it's not fine. Or, you know, you said it in terms of like sounding stupid if you say something. But for me, I feel so stupid that I didn't realize that it's not fine that my housekeeper lives like that on the salary that I pay her. Like, I feel happy to not be in the dark anymore, so you can actually do something about it.
Yeah. And I think that like the reality is every human has something that they're in the dark about that they shouldn't be in the dark about, whether they're the most righteous person, like there's always going to be something. So it's like finding the humanity in that of like, ooh, I missed the mark there. But the positive thing, the thing I can control is what I'm doing moving forward. And I'm going to be really mindful of this moving forward and educate myself and do what I can.
And this is the forum that we need to have these conversations. Yeah. So spread it out.
I have a couple questions just about raising kids in a different country, because I've had this conversation with Saichand a couple of times about just with some of the stuff that we've talked about that I struggle with going on in America. And I'm like, do you ever, as a person who chose to come here, feel kind of sad that you chose to come here over some of the areas, like other areas you could have gone to? Yeah. And I think it's really good for me to have those conversations with him because he can kind of also level set some of the things that I take for granted. Like, hey, America is really, and I'm not here to poo-poo on America. Like, there are great things about America, but I think some of the things I really struggle with, I'm like, you could have gone somewhere else and not worried about your kid one day going to school and having to deal with gun violence. Or you could have, these things that are going on here that are fundamentally affecting how I view raising a child here. And he'll kind of level set for me, like, okay, yes, I hear you on that thing. Here are the pros of like what kids are going to have here. And I'm just curious, like as a person who is experiencing that, you're 5+ years ahead of me on that journey. Like what were some of the surprising things in a good way, I think, of like Sienna's upbringing, maybe compared to yours? And what are some of the things that you're struggling with? And maybe that's like the community aspect or the grilling Saturdays.
Yeah. That's a really cool question to ask. Cause, I agree, a lot with what Sanchin says, like the pros outweigh the cons, although things like the school shooting, I struggle with that. Like I can go down a spiral, they call it spiral, on that. If you get me thinking about it, like that's a big deal. I try to keep it in perspective, like statistically. I don't know. That's how I try and cope with it. But honestly, there's problems in everywhere. No way is perfect. I mean, in the Netherlands, they don't talk about it. There's lots of racism. There's lots of racism. The system does not support everybody. They have a lot of refugees, and they're awful to them. In England, they have terrible classism and racism. South Africa has this, like nowhere is perfect. So the realization, and then South Africa has its pros and cons too, obviously. So I don't think there's anywhere that's perfect. And I don't think there's any, like, that's one thing I've learned as I've like gone through my 30s is there's no 100% right answer. I wish there was like black and white answers for things, but there isn't. You've just got to pick the best of a couple of different scenarios for you at that given moment, and that might change. So I'm happy with our decision to be in America. I think in one way, Sienna's childhood would be, in a lot of ways, Sienna's childhood would have been better in South Africa because of how sheltered she would be, how we would be able to completely shelter her. Also because of the hoods over our eyes, completely shelter her, give her every privilege, the things we'd be able to provide for her that we're not going to be able to provide for her here. Safety would be a different thing, but a kid needs to be protected anyway. So we would be giving her the same level of safety for many years that she would need in South Africa going forward for more years. So in a lot of ways, South Africa is, for a privileged white little girl, would be a better upbringing. Whereas here, sending her to public school where she might be yeah. So there's that. But at the same time, having the freedom to travel, having the freedom to be exposed to so many different cultures within our family and within America, to be a person from another country in America, and to have the culture of your parents and your kin, I think it's good for a person. It gives you a level of scope from an early age that you might not get until university or whenever you start getting adventurous in your life. So I'm happy with our decision to be here. I don't think some other places may have been as good or closer to family or whatever. I was thinking of moving to England at one stage, but can't get excited about that place. I don't think it's better than here. Like, so I'm not really answering your question.
No, I think it's good. I guess maybe very specifically, what are some things that Sienna, and I know you talk about like from the perspective of like big picture, like she's growing up in a different country and she has family in different areas, but like specific to the United States, I guess, is there something that Sienna, her childhood will look different from yours that you're really like happy with or proud of that decision? And if you say no, we'll just edit it out. It's totally fine. I'm just kidding.
It might be no. I mean, we're trying really hard to give her the aspects of childhood, like community and stuff that we had. I think it's safety. If anything else, it's safety. So not really in childhood. I think the scope of what we are hoping to give her is opportunity in her later life, to raise her kids wherever she wants to in safety, to have economic opportunity, which, you know, we haven't really gotten into it, but there's a heck of a lot of affirmative action in South Africa that's actually making it quite difficult for white people to get jobs. I don't think it's a bad thing. It needs to be done. But the fact of the matter is it's hard for the white people there to find jobs. So the economic opportunity for especially white males is decreasing, or, you know, maybe the privilege is just getting more equal. But the fact of the matter is she'll have more opportunity here, even though she's going to be a smaller fish in a bigger pond, which I don't think is bad for anybody. I had to learn that lesson here, that I was just going to come and get whatever I wanted, the way like my life kind of was in South Africa. So I think the scope is less on childhood and more on who she becomes as a person later in life, the exposure to these things and these opportunities that are actually more rightfully hers than what she would get in South Africa. Like, hell, I don't want to be another generation of creating kids with internal biases and things like that. So I don't know if it's like a real benefit from her. I guess I'm a bit of a cynic on that point. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that one. You can cut it if you want. We're doing our best to give a good life. It would be different wherever it was. Yeah.
I don't want to talk over Kate. I wanted to make sure you had a chance to ask any questions that you had.
Sorry. No, this question is so like, we don't even have to like leave it in. I'm just curious. But when you were talking about like how South Africa, it was like you could get from top to bottom in an 1.5-hour flight. I think about that here and I'm like, 1.5-hour flights are much cheaper than the longer flights, or like flying in general. Transportation is really hard and so expensive. Yeah. And like when you think about traveling around South Africa, is that typically a more affordable experience over there?
Well, if you're coming with dollars, absolutely. If you live there, it is, I would say, relatively the same. Like what you're earning versus what you have to spend to travel around. I think relatively the same. Like it's a privilege to take an airplane when you could take a bus.
Do you feel like it's similar with your sister in England, where you said that she can take like the train to Germany? Like for me, I feel like because I have never traveled outside of the US, I do not have a passport, which I should get one, but I just, I don't want to go anywhere right now.
Don't feel bad about it. I used to judge Americans for that, but you guys have so much to see in this country. Honestly, I've taken back my judgment on that.
But it's like
there's so much to see. You could go your whole life without and see a million amazing things without leaving this country.
But like I think about the people that live overseas and then can just like go on holiday to all these other countries, and it seems like they are just taking like quick flights or little trains, and it's like.
I think it's easier in Europe, easier and cheaper. My sister, the Brexit changed things a bit. They both need visas now. Before Brexit, it was much easier. They could just literally rent a car and drive there. If you get off the UK island, you can take the tunnel to France. So they do need visas now to do it, but it's still pretty easy. And I understand, pretty cheap. I think it's easier. I think it's easier in Europe. And most of my South African friends who have immigrated from South Africa have gone to Europe because I think it's easier to get in, or they have ancestors from there that get them in. But yeah, I think it is easier. And then also that mentality of taking time off and all of that makes it easier. The work-life balance is it's still hardcore in the UK, but for the most part, people don't feel bad about taking time off. I think that's most of our problem,
don't,
honestly.
and they get really long maternity leaves. I was like floored when I was working at Vivo. Some of our, it's an international company, and some of the people I talked to on work calls lived in England, and I was like, "What do you mean you get to take a 2-week holiday? Like, what does that mean?" Like.
And, it is so good. I'm such a proponent of this. We're going to South Africa for 6 weeks in December. And Dylan's going to have to work remotely for some of it. And I'm obviously not going to be working. But it's so good for you as a person. Like, we need it. Like, it's like a disease we've got. Dylan's first boss, he was like 40-something. He was a creative director. And he was taking his first 2-week vacation of his entire working career. We couldn't believe it. Dylan came home and told me that, and we were like, what? But yeah, I think that's the mentality. If we were taking longer vacations, we would be doing more stuff. Yeah. Totally. Because it takes so long to get anywhere.
I just feel like it's crazy here. It's like, if you get a job where you get 2 weeks of paid vacation, that's like, you're lucky to get it. But then that also has to include like your sick days, or if your kids get sick or anything like that. And it's like, you can't. So then you use up literally all of your days all at once so you can go do something, or do you try to stagger them and then they don't even feel like a trip because you actually only get a 4-day weekend instead of, a full week to go do something?
I've been cheeky about this since I started working. Like, Dylan and I would take these trips, like 6-week trips over December. We'd like make the use of the public holidays and our leave, and then we'd take unpaid leave over December, and we went on a couple of really cool backpacking trips to India for 6 weeks, and to Central America and South America on 2 separate occasions. So I've been cheeky since the beginning of my career. I'm like, well, I can ask. The worst they can do is say no. But we definitely have the mentality of not taking your leave, or like, having to use sick leave. I feel like it's a part of the reason why I've made the career choices that I have. Like, you don't get to tell me.
Yeah.
I'd rather not get paid. I'd honestly rather not get paid for that time than feel like I could lose my job or, for needing to take that time.
I will and have taken pay cuts to have more flexibility with my PTO, because for me, like, the flexibility was the most important. And I think part of that for me was coming from a freelance background. I was like not used to anyone telling me I couldn't do something in terms of a job. But yeah, for me, that was so important. And even when I left the entertainment industry and pursued education and teaching, that was a huge thing for me. It was like, okay, well, we're going to have all these built-in breaks. Now, I didn't realize that every built-in break, I was going to have a stomach bug from one of those sweet little germy kids. But I was like, to me, that was so important. And I think that was instilled in me pretty early on, because I went to Austria probably when I was like, I think I was like 24 maybe. And I remember just walking around and even seeing people at lunchtime. Like, the businesses, sometimes would close like in the early afternoon, or everybody would just be sitting out drinking coffee. And it just felt like, even if you weren't in touristy places, you noticed there was a shift in culture versus here, where we're like, quickly driving through a drive-through and then sitting in our car and eating our food. And I was like, I need like breathing space.
We do. Some of us are just braver than others that for like asking for it, or like
that'll be like one
it's
thing.
Not really, we shouldn't have to ask
that I will always like encourage people to do is like, we don't live to work. Like, we work so we can live. So if like the balance is off enough to where you're not living the way that you want to be able to live, then like the work part is the part that needs to be adjusted. And
like, once you discover like money doesn't matter as much as we've been told it does, like, yes, it matters. But yeah, it's worth it. I don't know, that freedom and some space to like go on vacation and let go and get bored and get excited to come back to work. Like that's how vacations felt in South Africa. You would get to the point where you're like, okay, cool, I'm ready. I've got all these things I want to get done when I go back. You don't get that from a 4-day holiday.
Nicola, thank you so much. And I can't wait to see baby photos in the next month and just like check in on you. Can't wait to meet your brother-in-law.
Thanks for having me.
Because I'm gonna be shocking up at his place one day.
Knock, hello.
Yes.
Honestly, you have places in England, you have places in South Africa. And the thing is we love doing it for people. Like it's not a favor. It's like we like sharing it. So don't feel bad about taking any of that up.